How many hours are in a day when you don't spend half of them watching television? When is the last time any of us really worked to get something that we wanted? How long has it been since any of us really needed something that we wanted? In a world ruled by the dead, we are forced to finally start living. These lines are featured on the backs of every volume and compendium of Robert Kirkman's hit comic series, The Walking Dead. The series was groundbreaking when it released in 2003, telling the story of small-town sheriff Rick Grimes after waking up from a coma and finding himself in a new world ruled by the undead. Okay, while I am half kidding, I do think there are some lessons we can take from Rick. So let's actually take a look at all 4 compendiums of The Walking Dead. Rick, throughout his journey, holds on to his morality, resilience, and relationships with others as tools for his continued survival in humanity. Rick represents hope for his group, and even a larger hope for some sort of future in this new world. Rick Grimes is beaten down a lot during the series, being mutilated, shot, tortured, stabbed, losing his family, his friends, and yet he keeps surviving. Rick begins to represent how we hope we would act in the wake of this type of crisis. Rick is put through the worst conditions and never loses hold of his humanity. Even against human threats like the Governor, Negan, and the Whisperers, Rick remains a confident leader. Kirkman used his series to explore the human mind, pushing each of his characters to their mental extremes, and then seeing how they affect the world around themselves. The Governor, after losing his daughter, immediately snaps, becoming a psychotic, cult-like leader, willing to kill everyone for his own one-sided goals, driven only by his basic animal impulses. Negan is also psychotic, but has a terrifying level of reasoning and cunning added to each of his horrific deeds.
You can breathe, you can blink, you can cry. Hell, you're all gonna be doing that.
And finally, the Whisperers represent the ultimate and complete loss of humanity, a group that has given up and embraced base survival only. By looking at this small slice of the overall cast of the series, we can start to see how Kirkman explores his complex characters, and how this set him apart with other zombie media of the era. I think it makes the most sense to break this down into sections for simplicity. First, we're going to look at the era this series was created in, so that I can paint a picture of what The Walking Dead was competing with at the time, and why it was so unique, along with the general cultural landscape that surrounded it. There is a lot of zombie media out there, especially in the 2000s and early 2010s. So we're going to focus on a couple popular examples, hopefully very quickly, before we move on to actually analyzing the story and its characters.
Miss, you can't be here. Employees only.
What is happening?
So to start what was supposed to be a brief talk about the 2000s, we have to actually start in the 1990s. In the US, the 90s were a time of moderate stability. It was filled with this unique cultural attitude of just complete boredom. There was no more Cold War, the economy was finally doing something, and it was going up, which was a bonus. People were actually able to find jobs and keep those jobs. I think my favorite example of the cultural attitude of this time is the film Office Space. I am really hoping Mr. Aubrey grades based on who wasted the most money.
Comes a movie about people who go to work. Who are part of a team.
And remember, next Friday is Hawaiian Shirt Day.
What's wrong with this country? Can't a man walk down the street without being offered a job?
And interestingly, horror media really died down during this era as well. I find it very telling that horror returned to more of a general human threat over monsters. Misery, Silence of the Lambs, and Scream all forego the typical ghosts and goblins. I think a big reason for this is that monsters are kind of this amalgamation of humanity's fears and anxieties. The most effective horror media is one that reaches out to the largest audience. So the 1990s, an era of general stability in America, was kind of just unified by a fear of technology. More of a job for sci-fi than horror. But this entire outlook completely changed going into the new millennium.
Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts. Terrible sadness and a quiet, unyielding anger.
On a national level, people no longer felt safe. It's clear that for a while, people thought that another disaster could strike at any moment. The rampant Islamophobia following the attacks just goes to show the amount of paranoia that people began to feel. Fear and violence was the public's natural response to tragedy. The 2002 hit indie film 28 Days Later is often considered the first in a long line of 2000 zombie films. So why was 28 Days Later so effective? The film presents a unique take on zombies, with humans instead being infected by a virus called the Rage. The film seems to imply that the zombies are a reflection of humanity's capacity for violence. The protagonist Jim even begins to embrace his own rage for survival, and a point is made that in the end, the line between him and the infected is blurred. The apocalyptic setting also hits the anxiety that everything is close to collapse. Another disaster will strike and we will all lose the stability that society has afforded us up until now. After the film, zombies clearly seem to strike a nerve with audiences. In 2004, Edgar Wright released Shaun of the Dead, a film about mindless consumerism and growing up. The film immediately and aggressively compares the living to the dead, showing humans displaying the same mindless and repetitive behavior as the famous monsters. The film even loops back around, showing that Sean, despite all his growth, has returned to his old ways. Every video game from the time also had to feature some zombies, Left 4 Dead being one of my favorite examples, also drawing similar parallels between the mindless murdering of the player to the unending hordes of undead. To be fair, it doesn't really linger on that idea because killing is fun. My point is that the era was dominated by zombie media because it perfectly reflected post-9/11 fears and the general instability that society was facing. Obviously, I think that each piece of media that we've talked about so far is unique, giving it its own identity, but largely they were influenced by the era they were created in. So hopefully you remembered all those characters from before, but just in case, I put them up on this little pinboard. We got Rick, held on his humanity. The Governor, lost his humanity, purely impulse. Negan, cunning psychopath, humanity. And the Whisperers, no humanity. I think we can view each of these characters in the context of Maslow's hierarchy of needs from his book, The Theory of Human Motivation. Each layer here represents something that each of us requires on a basic level. Now, I was a bit deceptive about Rick earlier. Rick does hold on to his humanity and always strives for a better future, but for the first maybe third of the series, he's floating around layers 1 and 2 of this pyramid. In the process, though, Rick kind of throws away the rest of the pyramid. Rick, in his desperation to bring his group somewhere safe, admits that he stops looking forward to the future and focuses on his day-to-day. Rick literally locks himself and his group behind bars and begins to hate himself with every person that dies. Rick even begins to distance himself from his loved ones. It's during this period that Rick makes his famous "We are the Walking Dead" speech. A speech where Rick explains that himself and the other survivors are no different than the zombies eating and killing. What I feel makes Rick different, however, is that he actually builds this pyramid back up over time. Once Rick finally finds a safe place to live, he gets married, begins to trust himself again, and even takes back his famous speech, stating confidently that we are not the Walking Dead, talking about his dream of a brighter future. Each of the series' human villains, in contrast, lose some level of this pyramid and never really come back from it. The Governor's daughter dies, removing his feeling of love and belonging. Despite having access in abundance to every other level of the pyramid, the Governor becomes a twisted, psychotic man who manipulates everyone around him. The people around the Governor see him as a kind of confident leader, but behind closed doors he lets loose his psychotic tendencies. He probably always had these things bubbling below the surface, it was just his daughter that made him snap. Negan is a bit harder to gauge here. I think Negan is unique in that he's the only one missing the final stage. This is one of the things that makes him probably the most effective threat in the entire series. All that Negan lacks is the aspiration to improve. Negan builds a powerful army and steals the food of surrounding settlements for his own game. The series proves that Negan will never really improve himself or his situation until he is absolutely forced to. Negan loses because he fundamentally fails as a leader, lacking any real ambition or drive to change anything. In an attempt to break out of jail, Negan finally takes some action to redeem himself and attempt to atone for his actions. I think it's interesting how after Negan is freed, he kind of just locks himself away all over again, not letting himself move on from the death of his wife. He realizes the error of his ways and his actions, but chooses instead to just not do anything rather than address any of it. The Whisperers are the ultimate example of this idea. The Whisperers are a group of humans who wear zombie skins to blend in with the undead hordes and survive off the land. They forego basic human decency, allowing members of their group to be killed and raped. The entire group has been so changed and traumatized by the loss of society that they have forced themselves into existing only in the first layer. They keep themselves in the position that Rick's group was in at the start of the series indefinitely, never moving on. I think the fact that we have so many different examples for these types of villains and characters is really what sets the series apart. Because it's a comic and can explore all of these ideas within its run, and evolve past its initial idea. The Walking Dead first released in 2003, 1 year after 28 Days Later, and also reflected the same cultural attitudes. The story was bleak and bloody, featuring a black and white art style and constant gloom. I think that Kirkman was probably just as frightened as the rest of the world when he first wrote the story, telling himself that the world we knew is gone. After the series wrapped up, Kirkman spoke on a few podcasts about his original idea for the ending.
When Rick gives the speech about like living in Alexandria long term and how they can rebuild civilization, it was just going to fade to a statue of him, and then you would zoom away from the statue and see that the statue's in the middle of Alexandria, and it like commemorates the time when Rick gave this, monumental speech, and Alexandria would be like built up like it was way more successful, and there was all kinds of like buildings and structures and everything in Alexandria, but it had been abandoned for many years and all the windows were gone and it was a complete ruin and zombies were walking by.
Oh,
So the end was like, Rick succeeded. He finally rebuilt civilization, and then it didn't work and there's still zombies and fuck you.
I think that as Kirkman wrote the story, and as his outlook changed, a lot more hope and positivity became present in each subsequent issue. Because it took over a decade to write, The Walking Dead is both a gloomy and dark insight into the hopelessness and pain of the 2000s, and a beacon of hope to the aftermath. The series really ends up feeling like a complete journey because of this. The horror and gloom of the world seeped into the black and white pages, but slowly it became more and more hopeful. The series began to allow more moments of warmth and tenderness. Things haven't exactly become stable now in the 2020s, but life goes on. The fear hasn't subsided, but maybe we can build something new, something better. I believe that with each new compendium of the story that released, the meaning of those lines on the back began to change to Kirkman. On July 3rd, 2019, the final issue of The Walking Dead was released. At this point in the story, Rick is long dead, but his dreams of what the world could be have come true. Society has repaired itself, and that statue of Rick stands tall in the center, a much more positive ending compared to Kirkman's original vision. We go to a trial, determining the fate of one of the last walkers inside the safe zone, where during her ruling, the judge gives some of the final words of the entire series. How many hours are in a day when you don't spend half of them watching television? When was the last time any of us really worked to get something that we wanted? How long has it been since any of us really needed something we wanted? The world we knew is gone. In a world ruled by the dead, we are forced to finally start living.